Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we are going to be doing another free motion quilting tutorial. We are going to be going with patriotic today because it's summertime. It's a good time to start working on all of those patriotic quilts. We just did a free download and a lot of you guys took advantage of it over Memorial Day weekend. So this might give you an idea on how to quilt it when you get ready to finish those patriotic projects. So this stencil is called Seeing Stars Overall, and it is a great beginner stencil because you have just a meander that you're used to doing. It's a very easy beginner one. And then we've got a few points and we can break that down so it's really easy to do, but it really gives you that nice star look. It's also really great for kids quilts because it's really kind of fun and whimsical, but it would definitely work on any patriotic quilt you're working on this summer. What I like to do is I like to use either the pink or the blue when I'm working with patriotic because usually you have white, blue, and red. And so you can't use the white because that's not going to show up on the white fabric, but the pink and the light blue will both show up on those dark red and those medium blues, which most patriotic ones are. At least for the US. I know we have internationals who watch too, but if you're in the US and you're going with that red, this will show up on it and you'll be able to see what you're doing. So if this is the first stencil or video you've watched us do with the stencils, I'm gonna real quick go over how to fill this. What you're gonna do is you're gonna pop this top off. It's kind of like a bank topper when you were a kid. So this pops right out and then you're gonna fill it to the top with the chalk that comes with it. It's a loose chalk that comes in a bag. And then you're gonna place your top back on. Then you are gonna bang this with the plastic part on 50 times hard against the surface. Like you're ticked at somebody, like really ticked. So once you've done that, you're going to, if you're just refilling, that's plenty, you're good to go. If you are filling it for the first time, you're going to repeat that step a second time so that way the chalk is evenly distributed across all of the pad on the bottom. So you're going to pop this off again, fill it to the top, bang it 50 more times, and when you're done, it should really look very pink. In this case, it's really, really pink. And you can see it going all around there. So it should be that saturated. If it's not, then your chalk is not going to transfer through the stencil and you're going to think it doesn't work, but it's just that you haven't primed your pounds correctly. If you want to see this, I'll link below the very first one of these we did where I showed you start to finish how to fill this, so you can always watch that. All right, so these stencils are really cool. They are called Full Line Stencil. They're made by Handsy Creations, the same people who make the Pounds Pad. And they are like a screen printing mesh. So if you ever got a t-shirt screen printed, it's the same process. The difference is what you do is when you're gonna swipe your pad over it, the chalk is gonna settle through those fine lines and mark your quilt in a really easy to see manner. So there's also these registration marks which can help you line things up. So I'm going to start over on the side here and I'm just kind of lining it up with the edge of my fat quarter sample. They're great to practice with, but if you are having issues, if you're doing this on an actual block, you can always use your blocks to line it up and keep it nice and straight. All right, so now I've got my Pounds Pad that is primed. So I'm just gonna hold this with my fingertips and then I'm going to swipe this across and you can see that chalk distributing through. And your goal here is to try to keep the stencil as still as possible so that you don't end up with double vision lines. If you do get double vision lines, no problem, just pick which one you want to follow, no big deal. All the lines are going to go away when you're done. I'm going to make sure that I've hit those registration marks really well because I'm going to use those to line it up for the next part. Now before I move this stencil too much, I'm going to pick up the side there and make sure it's transferred, and it has really well. I've got a couple areas of double vision where it moved just a little bit on me between swipes, but it worked out pretty well, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. But you always want to check and make sure that you can see really clearly before you pull it all the way up because it's really hard to reposition after. Your best bet if you do that is just going to be to wipe the chalk off and start over. All right, so now you can see this registration mark really clearly, and you can see where the design is ending. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to sort of pull this back where the registration mark is there to about halfway, and I've got it lined up so that my target, that registration mark, is right on top. And I can actually, because I'm working with dark fabric on the back here too, I can see, it's probably not showing up on camera, but I can see where the other bit was below this, so I can tell that this is lining up with this. That's something that you'll see more when you're working with it in person than it probably will on the camera. So once I'm happy with that being lined up, I'm gonna go ahead and do that again. And it's really important to swipe and not pounce. It's really tempting to do this. That's just gonna get chalk everywhere. But you wanna just swipe it across like that so that it can go through the mesh. All right, I'm gonna check again and see how that transferred. And I can still see that pretty well. All right, so I'm gonna show you how to transfer these markings too, but for right now, I only want to mark one pass at a time when I'm quilting, because this chalk is designed to stay on just long enough for you to quilt it and then go away. So a lot of this is going to just flutter away as I'm working on it. So I want to make sure that I don't go crazy and mark the whole quilt, because then I'm just going to have to redo work later. So one pass at a time, we're going to go ahead and give this a go and start quilting. All right, so I've done a few things to get my machine ready to go here. The first is I've installed a free motion quilting foot. That is very important in order to be able to do this. If your machine didn't come with one, we have universal ones that you can get at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You also want to lower your feed dogs or change your stitch length to 0 if your feed dogs will not lower. And the other thing is I want to make sure I use my trusty machiner's quilting gloves. This helps me grip the fabric and move it easier without having issues. So when I position this, I want to make sure that the marked fabric is facing away from my body. I once had someone come into the shop, they couldn't figure out why their chalk wasn't staying on, it was all over them. So you don't want it to be scraping against your body as you are doing this, because then your chalk will not stay in place long enough to quilt. All right, so I'm going to start by putting my needle down and up where the starting point is. This is so I can bring the bobbin thread to the top so I don't end up with a thread mess underneath. So what I'm going to do is just pull that thread, and you can see the bobbin thread just popped right up. So now I can get it back in place, and I can just stitch in place a couple of times, and that will lock those stitches in secure enough to be able to stay in place with use and washing. If you're going to put this in a show, then you would want to tie the stitches off, but this is totally fine for most applications. All right, so in general, you can only quilt in between what you can hold on your fingers. So the bigger sewing machine throat is, the more you can sort of move around a bit. Mine is sort of a medium-sized sewing machine, so I don't have a ton of space. So normally I would quilt like this, but for the camera, I'm gonna quilt with this hand down so you guys can see from the side camera. So just keep that in mind as you're watching it, that I'm doing it a little bit differently so that way you guys can see what's happening. All right, so the first part here, I have this wiggle till I get to my star. You can see I'm putting my hand down here, but I'm very gently putting that down because I do not want to get any of this chalk moved. So I just want to lay it down. I don't want to drag my hand over it because that will remove the chalk. All right, so I'm kind of getting my rhythm going here. You kind of have to listen that the sewing machine is moving at an even pace because you are controlling your stitch length when you do this. So you have to move the sewing machine and the fabric at the same rate of speed in order to keep your stitches even. Oftentimes I will actually move my sewing machine speed down. I didn't do that to start with, so I'm having trouble getting my speed where I want it. And I will start at the medium speed because that way I can kind of push my foot down kind of far, but still be able to go at a speed that I can control. All right, so I'm gonna come in here to the start of the point, and I'm gonna stop because my hand right now is over the star. So I wanna make sure that I lift and move that so that way I can do this entire star in one bit. So this is where I'm at on the quilting. So I'm gonna quilt to the point and out, point and out, point and out, point and out, and then keep on going with the swirls until I get to another point. So if you need to stop and reposition yourself, sometimes it's hard to see when you're going backwards on a domestic sewing machine. Always stop at a point because it's a lot easier to come out of that and get your stitches where you need them to be without it looking like you made a mistake than it is when you have the curve. So as much as possible, try not to stop on a curve. All right, so we're gonna come out to that point, and then I'm using my left hand to kind of pull it away, and now I'm pulling down, and then we're going back out. And then I'm using my left hand again to pull till I get out to that point. Now I'm shifting the tension to my right hand so I can pull it away. And we're pulling back. And it basically is just switching the tension from hand to hand so that way you can pull the fabric where you need to go, because you're going right, left, and sort of up and down a little bit. So you just kind of want to switch which hand is pulling based on what direction you have to go. All right, so now I've got a nice little meander until I get to the next part. That's a really common stitch. It's one of the beginner ones that we always teach. So that shouldn't be too bad. I'm gonna go ahead and just work my way over there. And again, I'm gonna try really hard not to stop, because it is much easier to pause and sort of regroup when you're at a point at one of those stars than it is when you are doing loops. All right, so we are now right here. So again, I'm gonna go around those points, just going from point to point. If I have to stop at any of those points to readjust, I will. But for the most part, I'm just going to put my hands here. Normally I would have my hand here, because then I could more easily go back and forth with around that star. But again, so you guys can see on the side, I'm gonna hold mine here. All right, so I always want to reposition my hands in between star points, because I basically want to make sure that I can make it all the way around to where the next star point starts, right here. So we're going to come out of here and we're going to go around to get to this point. And I want to make sure that I've got my hands positioned in a way that I can still have control as I'm going along, but also be able to not have to lift my hands up at all when I'm going through it. And this takes some practice of getting used to how to move things around. And even if you have done a lot of free motion quilting but you haven't done it in a while, you may need to just sort of get back in the groove, because it is something that is definitely a muscle memory skill. And so if you lose some of that, then it's hard to sort of get back in the groove without practicing a little bit. And I'm not perfectly on any of these lines, but the lines are gonna go away. So as long as you're following the idea of the curve, you're gonna be just fine. The one thing you don't wanna do is say you get way off and you're like, oh shoot, I have to get back to that curve. You just wanna get gradually to it. You don't wanna have a sharp deviation, because then it's gonna look like a mistake. Whereas if you just kind of follow along gently and you're not exactly on it and you kind of get there eventually, then no one's going to know once those chalk lines go away. All right, so the rest of the quilt just goes like that all the way along with this pattern design. I'm going to go ahead and keep doing this, and then we'll show you a little bit of it on the side so you can kind of watch and maybe get some ASMR benefits if you haven't Googled that. It's so much fun. It's definitely a YouTube hole you can go down. But I'm going to keep doing this, and then you guys will show you how to match up those registration marks so that way you can mark this across your entire quilt top. I always get this question when you get to the end here and the stencil doesn't meet exactly on it. What you want to do is just quilt right off your quilt. In something that isn't a sample like this one, you're going to have at least 5 inches of batting and backing. So just quilt right off the edge and then pick up the stencil design. In this case, I'm just going to quilt to the edge and then travel over and then pick right up where I left off and hit the next bit. And then when you put your binding on, especially if you're doing an edge-to-edge design, it will just look exactly edge-to-edge. All right, so I've made it all the way to the end of the quilting, and you can see here that a lot of the chalk is very dusty at this point. You can still see little bits of where the line was and where I wasn't on it exactly, but a lot of it has gone away, and the quilting looks very nice, even though I wasn't exactly on in all places. So the idea is that this teaches you the muscle memory you need to be able to quilt this design, and that eventually you can do it without the stencil. But it's definitely good to practice for a while with just test fat quarter sandwiches like this one, or if you do doll quilts for charity or anything like that, it's a great way to test. You can work on getting your stitch length nice and even, following the ideas of those curves, and really just getting it down, because really you are quilting a star and then you are quilting a meander, and those are both not very hard designs to master, and so you're just combining them to create something new and fun. And so it works great for those patriotic quilts that you might be making this summer, and also the kids quilts. So I haven't removed the chalk yet, and that's because I'm going to show you how to line it up with these registration marks. They're kind of faint right now, but I definitely can see them very clearly in person. They just might not be showing up so fabulous on camera. But I'm going to show you how to line that up so that way you guys can do it at home as well. All right, so I considered this to be my bottom when I was doing it originally, and I want to line it up in the same way as I did the original one. So you can see this little loop-de-loop is the same in these instances. So what I want to do is get this registration mark on top of this one right here, exactly. And to do that, the best way is to kind of fold it back and line it up so that the sort of target is right on top. And if you have blocks to go by, that will help you keep it nice and straight as you're working. This one is obviously just a practice piece. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm just kind of, and you would want to do this anyway, is pulling it back and making sure that the edge of the stitching for the new line is not going over any of the stitching that I've already done. If for some reason something shifts and something's going over, just make a little bit of an alteration, do like a skinnier curve, or bring your point in a little bit, and you'll be fine. No one will ever know. All right, so once I'm happy with that arrangement, I'm gonna go ahead and swipe that again. And there's not a lot of chalk coming off, so I'm gonna give this another bang. I'm gonna give it a bang off of my actual piece, because sometimes that will get the chalk to come off that we've already swiped down. All right, that should have pushed more chalk through. I can see already that it looks a lot better. So now we're going to give it a swipe, and oh yeah, you can definitely see that streak of pink getting left behind. So whenever you feel like you just need a little bit more, just go ahead and do that. Let's see how this is looking. Pretty good. All right. So I moved my registration just a smidge. It's not exactly on where it was. I think it shifted a little bit when I was doing the banging of the chalk, but it's really stinking close, and so nobody would ever know when I go to quilt this. And we'll just line it up one more time up here so you can see again. So again, I'm gonna go ahead and pull that registration mark, fold it back so that way it's right on top of this one below it. And then I can kind of look through and see and make sure that this is on there. And then there should be one up here too. There is. So there's a registration mark right there. It's pretty faint, but I can go ahead and line up these two, and they should be pretty much right on the same points. They sometimes will shift around again if your template shifts a little when you're doing this step. But for the most part, they're going to be pretty stinking close. And they are here. So here we go. This would be a really cool pattern to do with a patriotic or a kids quilt. You can see how we can really easily mark those stencils. And I'm going to show you also how easily the stuff wipes off. So you can wipe it off with a wet cloth, or you can just throw it in the wash. Just make sure you check to make sure all the pigment is off before you put it in the dryer, because the heat from the dryer will heat set it. But for the most part, I most of the time just use my machiner's quilting gloves just to rub it right off. So this is the part that I've wiped off. And then we've got the part, I'll show you the part close up here. So you can see kind of the difference. So this, I've wiped all the chalk off. This is what it looks like after I quilted it. You can see I'm not perfectly on any of these lines, but it still looks really good because I followed the idea of the curve and I followed the idea of those points. And then this is what the chalk looks like before stitching. I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. If you want to give it a go, we have all the supplies you need to make this happen over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. This stencil is called the Scene Stars Overall, and you can get that on our website along with the pounce pads. And again, if you're doing a patriotic quilt, I recommend getting either the pink or the blue because both of those are going to show up on your red, white, and your blue fabric. Thanks so much for following along. We have lots of other video tutorials using stencils to improve your free motion quilting, so you can check those out in the playlist. I've linked it in the video description down below. And you can shop all kinds of stencils and free motion quilting supplies so you can finish more quilts on your home sewing machine over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so you can see more, and check out the hundreds of video tutorials we have to make you a better quilter. Thanks so much for following along, and until next week, happy quilting. In order to keep your stitches even. Okay, you need to get down. Like you're ticked at somebody, like really ticked. And of course, this always gets the dogs going. Shh, it's just fine, it was just me. It was just me filming a video. You're okay. So why don't you go lay down and take a nap? I'm gonna have to lock them out too.